Okay, and good evening and welcome to tonight's Order Paper Show. For those who are wondering who the mystery person is, it's Alex, as you might know, who's got a very big thing about the Cross Valley Link Road, but I'm sure we can sit down there and try to get him to sit down there and hate free strikes legislation and partial strikes, what do you call wage deduction rules.
I'll just say the free strikes legislation, that's not going to work at all.
Oh, exactly. I mean,
last time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, put it this way. What people want are parole. What do people keep saying? We don't want prisoners to get parole, but we like prisoners to have the conditions of parole when they get released. Yeah.
And I'll also say about the wage deduction bill, that's not going to work at all. All that's going to do is cause strife within people who need to work.
Can I ask one thing? Can you shut your curtains, please?
Sure.
Just because that will give a better background noise, background coverage, because that's pretty damn bright.
Hang on.
Yeah, okay, that at least cuts back a fair bit of light. Otherwise,
the darkness.
You're looking at that.
I'll turn all my lights on. Hang on.
No, Alex will need to need to turn himself up. Yeah. Okay, so let's kick off with the first bill for this evening. Oh, heck, that's the wrong... yes, this is what happens when we haven't set up the shared screen yet. There we are. So there's our first... so we'll kicking off with the second reading from Nicole McKee on the reinstating of free strikes legislation at 1.5 speed.
Mr. Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Sentencing Reinstating Three Strikes Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published on the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website.
I move that the Sentencing Reinstating Three Strikes Amendment Bill now be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill gives effect to the Government's coalition and manifesto commitments to bring back the Three Strikes sentencing law as a key priority in our work to restore law and order. Reinstating the Three Strikes law sends a clear message to offenders that there will be significant consequences for serious repeat offending and that we denounce their actions. It recognises the harm to victims and communities that results from violent crime and makes it clear that this will not be tolerated. I also note that keeping these repeat offenders off the streets will contribute to this government's commitment to 20,000 fewer victims of violent crime by 2029. In broad terms, the bill will reinstate a three-stage sentencing regime with the offender facing increasingly tougher penalties at each stage. It will have the same overall structure and essential features as the previous regime. In general, offenders will be warned of the consequences of reoffending at their first strike and will not be eligible for parole at their second strike. For a third strike, offenders will have to serve the maximum penalty for the offence without parole. Mr. Speaker, the bill has now been reported back to the House from the Justice Select Committee, and I would like to thank the Justice Select Committee for its careful consideration of the bill and the submitters who shared their views with the committee. Mr. Speaker, in response to public feedback during the Select Committee process, Cabinet agreed to propose two changes to the bill for the Justice Select Committee's consideration. I welcome the committee recommending that these significant changes be made to the bill. I note that although these changes involve substantial drafting, they deal with clear situations. The first significant change lowers the qualifying sentence threshold to above 12 months imprisonment at Stage 1. Lowering the qualifying sentence threshold at Stage 1 addresses public feedback to make sure the regime properly targets serious offending, so serious violent and sexual offenders face appropriate consequences. While this lower threshold means more offenders will receive first warnings, there will continue to be the higher threshold of above 24 months imprisonment at Stage 2 and Stage 3 that must be met to trigger the regime's mandatory sentencing consequences. The government considers this approach addresses public feedback and strikes an appropriate balance by ensuring the regime continues to be workable in practice and does not capture low-level offending. The bill also contains additional technical and procedural changes relating to these amendments. These other changes mainly address when an offender has a conviction overturned or receives a new sentence above or below the qualifying sentence threshold after an appeal. For example, depending on their exact situation, an offender could either be given or lose a warning. These changes also address when an offender with a first warning reoffends and meets the threshold of above 12 months imprisonment for a first warning, but not the higher threshold of above 24 months imprisonment that triggers mandatory sentencing consequences. In this situation, an offender will be given an additional first warning to reinforce the mandatory consequences they could face if they reoffend. Mr. Speaker, the second significant change to the bill involves reactivating warnings issued under the previous regime. This change addresses public feedback about making sure previously warned offenders face further consequences if they reoffend. The government considers this change is appropriate to make sure offenders' warnings still count and are included, where appropriate, in the new regime's consequences. However, the bill provides that previous warnings will be reactivated only when they meet the qualifying sentence threshold. I consider this supports a consistent approach in how the new regime treats serious offending, even where that offending occurred during the previous regime. The Justice Select Committee also recommended further amendments to the bill to give effect to this change. These amendments set out how previous warnings will generally be treated under the new regime. For example, an offender's previous first warning will be a first warning under the new regime if their sentence is above 12 months imprisonment. The bill also provides for exceptions to this general approach. For example, an offender's previous final warning could instead become a first warning under the new regime. This could occur when an offender's previous first warning does not meet the qualifying sentence threshold. Additionally, the bill confirms reactivated warnings are valid and not affected by how an offender was originally warned. The bill's existing appeal provisions also apply to any appeal against a reactivated warning. For clarity, I note the bill's mandatory penalties will continue only to apply to sentencing for offences committed after the new regime comes into force. Any offences committed between the previous regime ending and the new regime beginning will not be captured by the new regime. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the significant changes I've outlined, the bill has also been amended to reflect other recommendations by the Justice Select Committee, and I wish to briefly highlight three such amendments. Firstly, the guidance for the judiciary about applying the manifest injustice test has been clarified. In particular, the bill now expressly states that a court remains able to consider the mitigating factors in the Sentencing Act when assessing whether manifest injustice applies. Secondly, a person loses a warning when, in accordance with the bill's stipulations, they are granted a pardon for an offence they got warned for. Removing a person's warning is appropriate where a miscarriage of justice has occurred. Lastly, the bill also clarifies how the new regime interacts with post-conviction orders granted under the Criminal Procedure Mentally Impaired Persons Act 2003. A court cannot issue any order that would replace an offender's sentence of imprisonment when the offender is facing the regime's mandatory consequences at either Stage 2 or Stage 3. And in regard to commencement, Mr. Speaker, there is a 6-month implementation period before the regime commences to make necessary operational changes. Mr. Speaker, ACT campaigned to reinstate the 3 strikes regime, and this forms part of our coalition agreement, supporting this government's commitment to restore law and order and to keep our communities safe. The bill, as reported back, ensures there are tougher consequences for serious, repeat, violent and sexual offending. I believe this supports the public having confidence in the new regime and enables law-abiding New Zealanders to feel safer. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
I have a feeling that bill completely misses the part about how to actually do this. Victims of people who have been subjected to 3 strikes events will not have any influence in the say of what happens when it comes to parole hearings because they're going to be gone. As a result, when that person is released from prison, they could effectively cause problems, stalk offenders, do all sorts of things there, and have very little redress to the victims. I feel that this bill itself has missed what it's trying to actually take on board. That's my point, worth.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at some of the papers that came out of the United States because that's where this idea comes from. It comes from the United States, in particular from California. What studies have found is that, there's a reduction when it comes to burglary. There is no reduction when it comes to murder and sexual assault. So if this bill is designed to address serious crimes, like last time, it will fail to do that.
Especially considering based on a first or second strike sentence that is, say, murder. Well, if it's murder, the only sentence a judge can issue is life imprisonment. The only thing that they have control over is the thing called the mandatory non-parole period. And the thing is, that will be the only three strikes punishment that will actually have parole conditions that actually belong beyond release, because when you're life imprisonment, you are forever on the life and parole, forever monitored once you've been allowed back into society.
I hate the idea of treating prison as a place of punishment. It should be treated as a place where people are put into essentially state care because they have violent tendencies. We've got to really get away from this idea of punishment, because what are we doing? What does punishment mean? It means withholding of care. It means withholding of rehabilitation, and then we release these people back out to the public over and over and over again, and they just create more victims.
Three strikes will deliver. Alex, you've been quiet.
I'll just say the bill shouldn't be. I have concerns with the bill, and it should be stopped at all costs if possible.
Unfortunately, it's past third reading.
So, and I think I'm trying to remember another group. They call themselves People Against Prisons Aotearoa. They've got concerns on whether free strikes work at all as well.
Well, it removes two fundamental positive aspects of our prison system. So, the parole board, it removes that check and balance in place on society. That little, you can keep control of that person and make sure that they don't reoffend. Free strikes basically sits there. Once you're on second strike, you're released. It's like, here's the keys to reoffend.
Yeah. Nowhere in the bill does it mention rehabilitation.
Yeah, and also if you're on a free strikes punishment, are you going to be denied rehabilitation while you're in prison?
Don't know.
Yeah, considering usually those rehabilitation courses are used to try and actually get you on parole. Okay, let's see what comes from Dr. Duncan Webb.
Reduced. We considered it to be probably one of the most poor, unfounded pieces of legislation imaginable, and then the Minister managed to outdo herself by putting in an amendment paper, or requiring the Select Committee to incorporate amendments, which made it even worse. And I could not believe when I heard her on Radio New Zealand saying that she had a flood of emails into her office, asking her to change it, to make it so that it included previous strikes. So I asked her, I used the Official Information Act, and said, show me those emails, that flood of emails that you refer to on Radio New Zealand, what are they? And she sent me some emails to her office, which were obviously prompted by an email to her supporter base. And do you know how many emails were actually addressed to her? Three. There were three. There were a few to Paul Goldsmith, a few to other ACT Party members, but to her, the flood of emails that she relied on in putting in an amendment paper that makes this bill retrospective were three. And she had the gall, the audacity, to go on Radio New Zealand and say, I'm listening to a flood of public opinion in my office. I don't know what you'd call that, but I know what I'd call it. And this bill, and here's the other thing, actually the close of her speech said a lot, because the real thing she referred to, the real reason for this bill is the coalition agreement. That she went on the hustings, she said, we're going to bring back three strikes, just like they do. And that's what she's doing. I'll tell you the other reason why she's doing it. Yeah, exactly. There is no other reason. Because there is no evidence that this is better for victims. There is no evidence this is better for offenders. There is no evidence this is better for the justice system, and there is no evidence this is better for society. So what we have is a doctrinaire and dogmatic party which has got the National Party, which doesn't really believe in this, to do its bidding. And yeah, you should be ashamed of yourself, because I can say that. Well, you take a point of order, Matt Ducey. If you don't like it, you take a point of order, because under that coalition agreement, your party is doing the bidding of the ACT Party across the board. Yep, that's right. Yep. You, for the baubles of office, this is the price, the baubles of your office, this is the price that New Zealand paid. And we sat through Select Committee, and we listened to a lot of thoughtful submissions. Submissions from the Children's Commissioner, submissions from the Law Society, submissions from the Auckland Law, the New Zealand Law Society and the Law Association, submissions from across civil society. And none of them thought that this was a good idea. And you know what? The most offensive thing about this is that we repealed the three strikes regime that was in before, and we wiped that slate clean. And so all of those people who did have a strike are currently, as it stands today, on zero strikes. And under this regime, they will retrospectively have those strikes reinstated. Now, retrospectivity in some situations is pretty rugged, pretty problematic, and you look at it carefully. But in the criminal law, when people's liberty is at stake, to go backwards in time and say things which happened in the past. And it's in the Bill of Rights Act. The Bill of Rights Act says when you come to sentencing, if there are different sentences in time between when you committed the offence and previously, then you're entitled to the lower of those offences, and that is for good reason. And here's the other thing. All of those people out there who think that they're clean-slated, that they have 0 strikes, what are we going to do to tell them that things have changed? That in fact, 'cause, you know, this bill is actually about, flawed as it is, this bill is about deterrence. This bill is about people knowing they're on strike 1 or 2 and altering their behaviour. So we better tell them that their strikes have been, reinvigorated, that they've been returned. What does the bill say about that? Nothing. So the so-called deterrence effect is 0, because they won't even know. I don't think they're watching, right? Yeah. And that is really, really offensive, because all of a sudden you're worsening people's position substantially. And it's not my theory, it's your theory. The theory that offenders take into account the consequences, the increased penalties that they might face. Now, if you believe in that theory, you would actually tell them the consequences just got worse. But they won't. Do that. And that it makes the whole bill incoherent. And so the other thing is this. This bill is a significant change to our sentencing structure. And the process, the bill itself, when it was introduced, was sent to the Select Committee in haste. We had a truncated process. And then here we are now. In urgency, before Christmas, late at night. We've got committee stage next. And I see the Minister's put an amendment paper, possibly more, I don't know, on the table because she hasn't yet got it right. And you know what? Maybe doing it right and following good procedure would be a good idea. But this government isn't interested in good procedure. It's not interested in getting things right. It's not interested in the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. It's just interested in getting into office and actually making sure that it has the baubles of office. So there is a real, and of course, the other thing is this. If you look at the advice, I mean, the government's not actually interested, and I put this to the Secretary for Justice the other day, that this government has passed numerous acts to date which make the position of Māori worse off. And here we go again. The regulatory impact statement again made it clear that this was not consistent with the Treaty of Waitangi, that it would have a disproportionate impact on Māori, and that it was not recommended. I mean, the Ministry of Justice thought this was a bad idea. But this government's not interested in that. It's not interested in evidence. It's just interested in dogma. And so, the fact is, whilst I guess the only redeeming factor is that this bill isn't quite as bad as its predecessor. But the fact is that having a 2-year sentence as the triggering factor will be distortionary in and of itself. There's this fatuous section in the Act which says that a judge should not have recourse, should not take into account the fact that there will be a strike imposed, as if a judge can take something out of their mind. The bill's flawed, it has no evidence, it's retrospective, it breaches constitutional principle, and it's an ACT Party bill with a National Party covering. It's a shocker.
An interesting speech from Duncan Webb.
Yep, I mean, I was looking at the evidence brief for the Free Strikes Law. It paints a pretty damning picture on the effectiveness of the regime and highlights the lack of studies that have been conducted. I'm going to quote them. Research in this area appears to be prone to political bias. To date, there have been no international meta-analysis or systemic reviews on whether or not the three strike laws reduce crime. That's pretty damning. It's a bad bill. What more do I have to say?
One of my concerns towards the free strikes bill is, for example, when you've got people who say, how I put it, say they use, for example, they use drugs such as cannabis, or they're growing it at home because they're in pain, and then once they're subject to the free strikes bill, that's where I have concerns, because if someone is growing cannabis for their personal use, and because they can't get access to pain medication, we are putting that person at the mercy of the free strikes law, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, is that, someone who is doing it over, as something like pain relief to medically put themselves into a more manageable life position is, facing the prison cell and the free strikes, and that they could go away for how many years is the maximum sentence for a cannabis conviction?
the three strikes legislation at the moment is more geared towards serious violent and sexual offences rather than drug abuse or potential drug abuse. So I don't think the current legislation is going to be applied to people who grow cannabis or smoke marijuana. But yeah, you do bring up a interesting point. That's going to be slapped on top. That's just an extra thing. You got 3 strikes, you're in prison. Okay, now we get to add extra prison time because you also have to be doing cannabis as well. So yeah, it does present an interesting issue.
Okay, let's see what Lawrence Zunan has to say for second reading.
There are so many issues that are wrong with this particular bill on multiple fronts. But I think I would start with the very foundation of our political system and in terms of the Westminster system and Western democracy and in the concept of the separation of power. Mr. Speaker, we have that for a reason. We have checks and balances between the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive for a reason. We have, Mr. Speaker, the principle of comity that the Honourable Shane Jones likes to talk about a lot in this House for a reason. But this bill fundamentally goes against all of that. This bill is an overstep of the executive power into the judiciary. And a number of experts have identified that in their submission. The New Zealand Bar Association, the New Zealand Law Society, and the South Auckland Bar Association. So these are people who are experts in the field of legality and judiciary. And all of their submissions unanimously said that we oppose this bill. Why? Because from the judiciary perspective, who have to put up with the consequences of this bill, it was awful for them. It was terrible for them to have to manage it the first time round. In one of the submissions, in terms of what the judiciary said, they said that when it comes to providing deterrent in the case, or talking about the 3 strike law in the case of Crown and Campbell, the court commented, it may seem very surprising that this consequence could be required by law for an offence of this kind, but that is the law, and I have no option but to enforce it. That is an overreach, Mr. Speaker. That is not conforming and not respecting the principle of comity. But that's not the only issue we have with this particular bill. We have seen it in case law over and over again in terms of the violation that this legislation, the first time round, have on our fundamental Bill of Rights in Aotearoa. In the first time round, we see numerous instances of the violation of Section 9 of BORA, which is the right against torture and cruel treatment. Right not to be subjected to torture and cruel treatment. And that was particularly evident in the Supreme Court's ruling in the 2021 case of Crown and Fitzgerald. But that was not all, Mr. Speaker. We have said that when we received the department report, when this bill first came to Select Committee, the departmental report said that, well, you know what, at least it's not retrospective. Well, guess what? The Select Committee, despite the advice from the official, despite the advice from the public, despite the advice from some members on that Select Committee, decided to introduce retrospectivity, which again is fundamentally against Section 26 of the Bill of Rights. This is no small matter. We have seen this government violating the Bill of Rights, our fundamental document, one of the fundamental documents in Aotearoa, New Zealand, over and over again. Some may say, look, this bill is different. This bill has changed. We've introduced some safety valves that potentially will manage it, but not in some of the cases I have just listed. In the case of Crown and Fitzgerald, Mr. Speaker, that if you're looking at Schedule 2 of this bill, Section 135 on indecent assault, in terms of whether it's severe or not, is still one of the 42 qualifying offences, which is what got the Fitzgerald and Crown case the way that it is in the first place. But, Mr. Speaker, that is from the perspective of legality. That is from the perspective of theory. Maybe some people are like, well, what's the big deal? What are we going to see in our communities? Not a lot. Not a lot as a result of this bill. This is not going to be helpful. In many of the submissions we have seen from lawyers, from experts, from community leaders, they said this bill will not help in terms of driving down crime. Even the statistical modeling that we've seen from the previous sessions suggests that this provides no significant deterrent for reoffending crime. But what we will see, Mr. Speaker, is that we will see an increased number of prisoners in our prisons. Well, you know what? To the Honourable Minister, it's not so much about increasing, they can't commit crime, you're right. But you are kicking the can down the road. But you know what else is the problem here? We have seen the previous time that introduced it, take a call and use your full 10 minutes. We use your full 10 minutes, government members. But the last time this was introduced, at stage 1, 63% of offenders were Māori. At stage 2, 82% of offenders were Māori. And at stage 3 level, 81% of offenders were Māori. And this government wonders why we say prison is the only housing policy they have for Māori. This is not the only issue though, Mr. Speaker. Increasing the number of prisoners is only one part. We're also going to see a backlog in the courts. If you're going through the bill, and as we go on to the committee stage, we have a number of amendments on this bill because the back and forth that the court will have to do to determine various levels of warning and various levels of appeal is convoluted, to say the least. So what is the support to our already struggling court system? Yes, there is a bill currently going through the House on increasing our district court judge from by 1. But Mr. Speaker, that is not going to add any help to the staff and to the people who are currently working in the court system. It's not going to add any help to the already struggling legal aid system that we have in Aotearoa. So in fact, we are actually going to see more people potentially on remand as a result as well. But Mr. Speaker, another point that we're seeing in terms of the community, and I will talk about other submitters as well, but I want to first speak from the perspective of the offender. The Green Party of Aotearoa believe that the best form of rehabilitation is if we have a restorative justice system, where those who do offend, our prison founder, feel like that the society still want them to be a part of it. This bill, Mr. Speaker, does nothing to address that. What is going to happen to an offender, Minister of Mental Health, when we are seeing that they have a sense of neglect? When they feel let down by society, when they feel like, you know what, the society is against me anyway. Screw it. I'll just do whatever. I don't really mind. That's not how we reintegrate people into our communities, Mr. Speaker. But finally, we also heard submissions from those who have been victims of this. And crime is never okay. And we are always going to be speaking for our victims. However, but when we ask them, if this bill, how do they know by evidence that this bill is going to help drive down the crime? What evidence do they have of that, other than maybe make them feel like crime's going down? There was no response. Because this is not the way to do it, Mr. Speaker. So finally, the Green Party will not be supporting this bill. This bill fundamentally undermines the constitutional arrangement of Aotearoa, New Zealand. It also does not provide any form of safety for both the victims and offenders. And we will be gladly debating a lot of these in the committee stage to come.
James Nigger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so that's Lawrence's speech there.
I
think it's really interesting. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I'd like to say I think Lawrence has some pretty good points about the bill not working. But the problem is that, say, the free strike law, it doesn't stop a vicious cycle of reoffending, to be honest, if you know what I'm saying.
No, it doesn't. It just basically keeps things going. Plus, it also doesn't actually put the checks and balances in place that actually stop the reoffending. Like parole, like rehabilitation courses. Yeah. Should we get to a compilation of seat warmer speeches?
Sure, let's go ahead with that.
I want to start my contribution by indicating that the National Party obviously supports this bill. We'll support it through to its passage tonight, maybe tomorrow morning, but let's say tonight, all going well. Because we are going on to the committee stage after this, once we vote in favour of the second reading, I think it would be an opportunity for all in the House to have a good look at the bill and to make a contribution and to try and explain to the public what we're trying to do here. Because while members opposite do make some good points around the purpose of the justice system, and part of that is rehabilitation, and part of that is deterrence, but part of our criminal justice system is detention. Part of it is taking bad people, dangerous people, harmful people off the streets and keeping members of the public safe, albeit for a limited time and albeit for limited purposes. But part of the reason we have a criminal justice system in this country is to detain people and is to keep people safe. And that is what this bill tries to address. There are other pieces of legislation, there are other policies out there that will, over the course of the next 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 years, who knows, will address other issues in the criminal justice system. Bills like the Corrections Amendment Bill, now the Corrections Act, which introduce rehabilitation for prisoners on remand. Bills like sentencing reforms, which will limit discounts on sentences. Other bills are around social investment and the Social Investment Agency, which will create an environment, a world-leading environment, where we invest early, we invest often, and we prevent these harms from happening in the first place. But those bills are for another day. Today is where we're talking about the three strikes legislation, a great piece of legislation from this coalition government led by the able Minister Nicole McKee. I'm looking forward to the committee stage where we can address these issues, where we can put the case to the public, where we can vote on the bill, where we can move forward to third reading, and we can vote it into law so that we can keep New Zealanders safe.
And moving on to the second seat warmer.
The Honourable Casey Costello.
Mr. Speaker, I put together notes to provide a logical and supportive argument to this bill, and then I listened to some of the contributions across the House. After we've just finished talking about this need to pass legislation to protect victims, how it's so important that we intervene and we provide greater protections, and we're so keen to pass laws to make more protections available. But sometimes when bad people do bad things, they need to be punished. And sometimes when bad people do bad things, they do them again and again. And while you stand up there across the other side of the House speaking about the rights of offenders, yet again we hear this crickets around the rights of the victims. If you want to hear about protection for Māori, then protect them from Māori who are offending. That is the point of this bill. New Zealand First believes that we should go stronger, that sometimes you have to ensure that people, that society are protected. When you have been to the situation where you have seen the victims who have been victimised by those who have just got out of prison, who are continuing to offend, who have no empathy or warmth for the vulnerable in our society, who have the sense of entitlement that the punishment means nothing, then sometimes you have to make tough decisions and not just continue to pass more legislation that tinkers at the edges.
we have to commend the Minister for having the integrity to stand up and say, enough is enough. Now, we don't say this is the solution to end all crime. There is a range of initiatives that need to be dealt with. It is the improvement of education. It is getting the scourge of methamphetamine out of our societies. There is a whole range of things around housing that this government will deliver and is delivering. But right now, we have more and more victims. After 6 years of increasing violent crime, after 6 years of victims being created left, right and centre in this country, finally we're standing up and going, we will stand up for Māori. We will make sure that victims are not being made by those who care not an iota. That is why the three strikes legislation is important, because sometimes the grown-ups have to stand up in the room and go, bad people do bad things, and sometimes the victims have to be put first. New Zealand First completely commends this bill to the House, and we look forward to the committee of the whole House.
Yeah, so a few things to say about that one. I don't give a toss about punishment if crime is not being prevented. You could whip someone, 100 lashes or whatever. If it doesn't stop crime, it is useless. What is better is addressing the causes of crime. That is being tough on crime, right? Addressing issues like poverty, addressing things like mental health, getting people the rehabilitative care they need before they commit crime, okay? Prison is just what happens when crime has been committed, okay? Once someone's gone to prison, you've already got a victim, right? And you've potentially got a future person that could be committing future crime, okay? Because that's what often happens to victims. Victims sometimes go on to commit crime themselves. So, you're not tough on crime when you've got people lining up going to prison. Three strikes legislation is going to increase the amount of people that are going to go to prison. By the way, that's what happened in the States, is what happened last time this was implemented. And you're going to end up with a very vicious cycle, broken families, more crime, more desperation, more trauma. Yeah, this is I don't care about the idea of punishment if rehabilitation is not being done. I don't care. If it's not preventing future crime, I don't care.
I mean, that was something that Casey Costello actually brought up, was they just got released from prison, they commit a crime.
Yeah, she's right.
This is what three strikes will do when you take the parole aspect and the rehabilitation aspect away from the system. And that's where three strikes completely misses the mark. Is, maybe strike two, now don't agree with the law, but maybe instead of having strike two being the sentence for no parole, why not be the maximum sentence with parole at approximately where you would have been given the sentence without parole? So say if you were, the maximum sentence is 7 years, but you would have been sentenced to 3 years, why not be sentenced to 3 years with the ability to be released on parole for 3 years? That means you've got a 4-year period, you can monitor that person. But
I want to address this comment just real quick.
3 years and then to be released with no rehabilitation, you haven't got the monitoring, you haven't got the tools that can immediately throw them back into jail once, if they do commit. You don't have the rehabilitation courses, incentives to do that, to get parole. So that is where that, I believe, could be a better stopping point than what it is. But hey, it doesn't say, people see parole as being a negative thing. They don't see that it's actually a fundamental part of the criminal justice system.
And this comment here is part of the problem. I'm much more interested in reducing and preventing crime. This type of comment is not really interested in preventing crime or solving the causes of crime. This comment is much more interested in punishment. And that's a problem. We've already got shit ton of punishment. It's not working. We need to have other rehabilitative systems in place. We can look at comparative countries like Finland, who have a low reoffending rate. And for whatever reason, we're following America, which has a high reoffending rate. So we need to be smart about this. This is not, I'm sorry, but I strongly disagree with this statement here. We need to be focusing on preventing crime, not on necessarily punishment.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. There is a lot of barriers put in place where there should be a prevention to a crime, but sometimes the floodgates are let open, or the factors are purposely put in place to create the scenario to force a crime to occur when they shouldn't be.
I just don't understand why rehab is considered to be a prize. It's like, oh, we're rewarding the criminal by putting them through a rehabilitation process. I'm like, no, it's not. If someone is ill or someone has issues with their mental health or someone has, it's not a reward to give them help. Okay, it's like, well done, you get help. No.
Yeah, it's about fixing the problem. Okay, let's see what Hannah has to say about it.
Ki te wahai ngā kōrero mo te Pāti Māori i te pōnei. E tuku mihi, e tuku aroha, e whakaaro nui te ana tō mātou pāti ki ngā whānau, ngā tangata, kua pēhi I ngā tūkinotanga o te wā. So I want to extend our absolute aroha to any victim and whānaus of victim, period. Even more so, I want to mihi to the police. And to the many police officers who we've been in constant communication with, local police commanders, officers, even in a bi-party approach too in those different hui. And finding us way in a solution to make sure that them and our whānau are safe in our communities and what this looks moving forward with this legislation. But I thought it would be ideal to take my 2 cents on being a rangatahi Māori, being profiled, and what those experiences are. And I reflect hugely today on Question Time, as I asked this House, I asked ministers on the huge impacts of how the police enforce their gang legislation, as we have seen recently in Wellington and Auckland, where rangatahi Māori have been profiled and arrested at gunpoint on the suspicion, and I repeat, suspicion, of gang affiliations that were never proven. And this relates purely to this bill, because there's no denying that our criminal justice system is institutionally racist and unfit for Māori in Aotearoa. Māori suffer unequal outcomes at every level, and we are more likely to be stopped, searched and arrested and convicted than anyone else. And I want to speak to my own experiences as to why I asked that question today in Question Time.
Well, as it relates to the bill.
As it relates to the bill.
And with frequent references to the bill.
Really? See, this is what I'm talking about. This is actually what I'm talking about. I can say Hakuna Matata in this house.
That reflects, if you can just say, that reflects on the member that made that comment and leave him to reflect on that himself, but you reflect on the bill, please.
Can my time be stopped? Despite being 20% of the population, Māori are 37% of the proceeded against by police, 45% of people convicted, and 52% of the people are in prison. In 1988, Moana Jackson's groundbreaking report, He Whai Painga Hou, exposed a deep-rooted racism at the foundations of our criminal justice system. That is precisely how the Ministry of Justice summarised 3 strikes in its regulatory impact statement, quote, reinstating a 3 strikes regime would exacerbate the over-representation of populations which are already disproportionately represented in the justice system, end quote. I get so emotional sometimes around how it feels being a rangatahi Māori and having first-hand experience of racial profiling. And today I was so flabbergasted at the fact that it was being gaslighted as if it doesn't exist. And then I reflected and realised, no, they wouldn't even know what it feels like. They don't know what it feels like to be a 12-year-old rangatahi going to the movies and actually being called up by the police for doing absolutely nothing. They wouldn't know what it feels like to be stopped every so weeks because you are in a community in Huntly and not in Wellington. You don't know what it feels like to have 5 at a non-gang affiliated tangi and having 5 cops turn up for absolutely no reason. And even to the point where I'm questioned before entering this house whether or not I'm even an MP. And many people actually have told me, Bub, you might not be ready for Parliament. Well, guess what? Parliament wasn't ready for me. And this is what I'm talking about, the racial profiling that we experience. We're not criminals, but we are overrepresented by the justice system. So I think it's finished, but I'll be carrying on.
And I mean, that's also something that can be said there when you're presumed guilty before accusation.
I've got also something to add. Charmaine, your comment is pretty, how I say it, is pretty...
Racist?
Yeah.
As a Māori person myself, I'm just like, wow.
One of the things
thank you for your insight.
One of the things I want to say is that with the 3 strikes law, one of the biggest issue is how it's implemented on ethnicities such as Maori and Asians. The reason why I'm saying this is, as someone who founded the Harm Reduction Coalition Aotearoa campaign, we are in the starting phases because we are responding that after the 2020 cannabis referendum, we are telling people the fight is not over. We are going for the final punch, which is ending drug prohibition itself. What we've seen is when it comes to drug use, it's very racist on Maori people. And it's overrepresented in prison statistics as well. And when people use drugs, be it Maori or Asian or whichever ethnicity, when they are subjected to that 3 strikes law, it becomes what happens, and the end result is they will eventually resent society for it, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah. And this is why I'm saying the 3 strikes law needs to be scrapped. And Charmaine, the comment, I just disagree.
You know what? I'm going to execute my executive powers and say goodbye to this person because I'm getting pretty annoyed with this individual.
Especially when there's misleading to say, oh, it's telling they're only 20% of the population, well, actually they're 20. But if you're targeted more than any other race, you are going, that is going to bump up the statistics. So let's kick off to Committee of the House. And so this is B where their questions, amendments will be put forward. Let's kick off with Lawrence Unan. It would help if I actually change that across.
We're gonna go clause to clause, clause by clause. And I want to start with, the most fundamental bit, and let's start with clause 3. Now, I have a number of amendments for this bill overall because of the complex interaction between the Sentencing Act 2002 and this particular one. So I guess my first question, if you're only looking at clause 3, is there are a number of issues in here, and I think a number of inconsistencies with various parts, and we'll go through those. But overall, as we're going through this bill, and as we have completed the select committee stage with additional insertions and additional amendments being made by select committee, I want some possibly reassurance from the minister that all consistency between the Sentencing Act 2002 and also with this particular bill have been met. Now, the other reason I mentioned this is because within the sentencing bill and also with this particular bill, there are numerous instances of requirements for minimum term of sentencing. And particularly in some areas, and I don't know the section of the Sentencing Act off the top of my head, but it specifies that, that the term of sentence cannot be, when you're looking at a maximum term of sentence or maximum term of, can't be less than 10 years. But there are a number of issues in here which doesn't quite add up. That's just to give a very, very brief example. Again, I'm happy to find the exact section number and come back to the minister for specific points. But overall, has there been a consistency check between the two, and particularly with regards to the new sections? Now, the other thing I want to go on to, other than section 3, is starting with section 4. And I want to particularly address section 4, subsection 2, and in terms of the definition of permanent court order. Now, I had a look at the Criminal Procedures Act 2011 and the definition and the use of the permanent court record in that particular act. But what is different over there is the fact that despite the term permanence, in the Criminal Procedures Act, I would have read that permanent court record in those contexts as specified in that act is indeed permanent, but for the context of this bill, when we can see in certain cases a warning being retracted, that kind of defeats the purpose of permanence. So I have an amendment paper on this particular section, on this particular part, Madam Chair, if the Minister wouldn't mind considering, which deletes the word permanent purely on the basis that there are instances where such record would not be permanent. And also is to acknowledge the fact...
It would be helpful if you could reference the number of your amendment paper
sure.
as you speak to it.
Sorry, it's a tabled amendment, so I don't know if there is a particular number.
I just understand it doesn't.
Yeah, it's the first one, clause 4 and clause 7.
Thank you.
So in this case, it also acknowledges and reflects the warning system and the standard court criminal proceedings are also fundamentally different. So yes, so those are the two questions I have for the Minister to start. Thank you.
Madam Chair. Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you. Thank you to the member for your questions. In regard to your first tabled amendment, will not be supporting that, and the reason why is because the term permanent is consistent with other statutory language used about the court record. Warnings are given into the official court record.
Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb.
Chair.
Okay, so that was a suggested amendment paper that Nicole just basically said, no, not supporting.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a bit distracted with what was going on in chat. Normally I normally don't do things like that, but it was like, no, I'm not gonna debate with someone who's a bit in the head. To put it bluntly.
Yeah, no, it is definitely. It's not helpful when you're not having a level-headed conversation.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know how to press ignore you, so I'm just gonna have to, send you on holiday.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things that go on there. I mean, your Bible verses that were quoted as one of the comments.
Yeah, I'm just like, no, that hasn't got anything to do with politics at this point. Yeah, it's like, no.
Oh,
okay.
One thing to Charmaine, if she's still weird, don't bring religion into this at all. It's got nothing to do with religion.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what Dr. Duncan Webb's got to say, and we'll probably all now listen for real commentary.
Before I get into the detail of this legislation, I want to give the Minister an opportunity to, on the record, address her motivations for directing the Select Committee to alter its approach and make it retrospective and change the first strike threshold. And I am really concerned that she went on Radio New Zealand and said that there was a flood of emails. That wasn't her exact words, but that was certainly the inference. When, you know, and if the Minister's going to go on and say that there's a flood of emails, I'm going to ask for them. And she provided a number of emails, only 3 of which were actually addressed to her. So many were forwarded to her, some were to her colleagues in the ACT Party, some were to her colleagues in the National Party. And here's one, the quality of them was this: Item 1, offenders who commit murder at second or third strike will receive an appropriately lengthy non-parole period. Not good enough. What does appropriate mean? 1 year up to 20 years. Why not state a minimum sentence of, say, 10 years? End of email. I mean, if that is the kind of evidence that this Minister takes into account when instructing a Select Committee, which she shouldn't do because she's the executive and we're Parliament, then I'm really concerned. If she is going to change tack, as she seemed to in her public statements, and say, no, it was the burden of evidence before Select Committee, does she not think it's the Select Committee's job to sift through the evidence, of which the government has a majority, to determine what the appropriate changes are? Now, I am really concerned that the Minister, when she said she had a flood of emails, if this, either she did not provide all the emails she referred to when she responded to my Official Information Act request, or when she was speaking to Radio New Zealand, was not being fulsome. And really, what she was referring to was the fact that at Select Committee, the Sensible Sentencing Trust had hundreds of form submissions. And in fact, that's what she was responding to. Now, I think the Minister has an obligation to respond, to say, in fact, this is why I did. Now, if it was her own policy work, a bit like Casey Costello, perhaps she had a document she found on her desk.
Keep it to the bill.
Pardon?
Keep to the bill, please.
Well, no, this is about the major change of direction.
I accept all the questions you were asking to that point.
Yeah, the point is this.
Oh, sorry.
Halfway through the consideration of this bill, we made a significant shift of direction, and I want to know what the basis of that shift of direction was, whether it was the 3 emails actually addressed to her, or whether it was the form submissions from the Sensible Sentencing Trust, or whether it was something else.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for asking me this question, because it allows me to correct the misinformation that has been pushed across this House. When the referral to a radio interview that I did not at any stage refer to a flood of emails, as the member continues to say in the House. I referred to the fact that I had received emails and that I had also received other correspondence. The fact that this member actually wants to stand up and litigate over and over and over again the fact that the emails numbered 3, using
If
words
the members
that
on
were
this
not,
side could just let the Minister speak, please.
words that were not actually used by me, then I think that will speak to the quality of the debate ahead.
Well, that feels like a bit flobbing off the question in one aspect, but hey, you know, maybe she feels justified in her flob-off answer.
I'm trying to figure out whether or not she said a flood of emails. I'm trying to find the transcript, but I can't seem to find any transcript for that.
Well, yeah, but the transcript was from a Radio New Zealand interview, not from what was within the House.
True.
Yeah. You're quiet, Alex.
Yeah, I would say between the 3 strikes bill, 2 of the coalition's worst bills would be the 3 strikes bill and the Social Security Amendment bill.
That's just in the last sitting week.
And I would say the 3 strikes bill and the Social Security Amendment bill will also affect people with disabilities as well if they get caught in the justice system.
Yeah. Let's scroll down to see if there's a bit more. Let's see what Simon Court has to say. Since, you know, we've got to be fair, we're going to give every MP a chance.
Tabled amendment to Clause 6, where the member proposes in Clause 6, new section 82A1, replacing must with may. And when I refer to the bill in Clause 6, it proposes additional consequences for certain repeated offending must not be taken into account when determining the length of sentence. I'm interested in the Minister's opinion. Does the proposal by the member to propose to change must to may provide the necessary deterrent to people who consistently commit offences? As the Minister said, 70 or more, Mr. Zunan. Does Mr. Zunan, does the Minister agree that
Professor Mr.
Zunan's proposed amendment to change the legislation from must to may provides the necessary deterrent when determining the length of sentence of imprisonment to be imposed on an offender for stage 3 offence of murder, the stage 2 offence, or stage 1 offence? The court must not, Dr. Zunan, take into account the consequences the offender might face. And that is because, Minister, I might presume the offender should face the full force of the law. Minister.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you for that question about the amendment paper that has been lodged by the member from the Greens. We will not be supporting that amendment paper. And the reason for that is because must is must. We are talking about New Zealand's most serious violent and sexual community. And they are out there creating harm in our communities. And it's going to stop. It must stop. It not may stop, it must stop. When we are talking about these people have committed crimes that fit within a regime of what will be 42 offences, serious violent offences. We want this requirement and will ensure that this requirement is there in all cases.
Honourable Ginny Anderson.
I mean, why isn't there a punishment for mandatory chemical castration for sexual offenders, or maybe permanent chastity cages, or something like that, or for murderers, the death penalty? You know, why don't you sit there and put that as a government bill instead?
I mean, I'm okay with stopping, you must stop these people, but the 3 strikes bill is not going to stop these people.
Exactly.
It's the problem. The evidence is not there that this type of legislation actually stops these types of actions from occurring.
One of the things I've noticed from, I think, Nicole McKee, she is showing the mentality that she's always correct. That's really disturbing.
Yeah, she is right, everyone else is wrong sort of mentality, which is not a good way to actually be judging things, because that could backfire quite negatively.
Yeah, especially when the evidence is, inconclusive at best.
Yeah.
It's like, does evidence matter? You're going to spend millions and millions of dollars enacting something that is shown in other countries to not really work.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what Ginny Anderson and Tom Rutherford have to say.
From the Minister in relation to Part 1, that there's new sections in there that specifically provide for first warnings and the qualifying sentence imposed for a Stage 1 offence. It also spells out that the first warning to be given if a sentence of imprisonment between 12 and 24 months is imposed for Stage 2 offence. But I think it's really important because we were a bit confused at the committee when we asked these questions of officials, so we'd be really grateful if she could shine some light on it, that what actually happens operationally in a courtroom when there is somebody who's been charged with an offence that qualifies as a Stage 1, as specified under Part 1, Section 7. It's the new Section 86KA. So someone who is up now for that, they qualify for that, but what if they had a previous first strike? Or what if they had previously had 2 strikes? And so I would like to understand, first of all, whether the administrative records that are kept are able to accurately show that they'd previously received 1 or 2 strikes, and that there is sufficient information in a courtroom, whether it be the police prosecutor or the courtroom administration staff, to have access to that information to know that that person had actually previously had a first or a second strike. And the reason I asked that question, Madam Chair, is that when this regime was introduced the first time, there was a real problem with implementation. And some of the questions we were asking in Select Committee seem to indicate that this same problem could rear its head with this set up the way it is here. And the problem we had when this was first implemented was that when a person appeared before the court and was being charged with a strikeable offence, that unless the Crown Prosecutor was notified that in fact was a strikeable offence, and that when making the case to the judge, they had to say, Your Honour, this person's up for a strikeable offence. But if the Crown Prosecutor failed to do that, that person walked off without receiving a strike on their record. And that was problematic because there were sometimes strikes being missed because there was not an adequate integration between justice, courts, police in order to accurately capture that. And so there was a running tally we would have to keep of how many strikers had got away, and then we had to draw straws about who told the Minister. And so I would like to know, given the added complication that this situation now provides, which is that there's retrospective legislation reactivating all of those prior strikes, how can we be reassured and how can the public be reassured that there is an adequate integrated data set that captures that information in a way that when a person who is going to be held accountable under this legislation is informed of that and is aware of that when they're seeking legal advice, when they're presenting their case before the judge. So I'd like to know who informs the accused that they're up for whatever strike they are, how that information is conveyed. And secondly, how do we know that there's an accurate capture of that information? And it's incredibly important, Madam Chair, because I would like to know from the Minister if there is a comprehensive list of all of those people who previously received a first, a second or a third strike, and if they have contact details for all of those people, and if her ministry intends to reach out to all of those people and to give them the information in order to deter them from committing any more crime and creating some more victims. And finally, I'd like to know, Madam Chair, what if they had a third strike? Do they go back to one again? Does it start again, go back to go, don't collect $200? Is that the case? If they've had 3 strikes, do they go back to 1? Or are they just getting another strike? Is it continual strikes? Are they always eligible for that maximum part? Madam Chair.
Tom Rutherford.
The
really good
amendments that have been lodged by Dr. Lawrence
from Jenny,
25
actually.
related to Part 1, almost all of them related to Clause 7. Keen to understand the Minister's position on whether she will be supporting those amendments from Dr. Shunan or not, and if not, then we can return to the substantive parts of the legislation that we'll be continuing to progress through. So keen to understand from the Minister whether she'll be supporting the 25 amendments put forward by Dr. Lawrence Shunan.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Madam Chair, I'll go through the members' tabled amendments that has just been referred to by the member Tom Rutherford, because especially the ones that relate to Clause 7. There is one there that I will call as number 5:03 p.m. This one? Yes, 5:03 p.m. I will not be supporting this because it already matches existing law with regard to sentencing. It's the same as the previous regime. I'll look at amendment paper now that is number 5:04 p.m. and I will not be supporting this one. This is in relation to Clause 7, new section 86J A1 and 86J B1. Will not be supporting this. We think that the existing thresholds already strike the right balance. In regard to tabled amendment 5:05 p.m. It's quite a big one, so I won't go through all of it, but it's about Schedule 1 in Clause 7. Will not be supporting this one. We think that the existing thresholds, again, strike the right balance. In relation to tabled amendment 5:06 p.m, Clause 7, new section 86J, we will not be supporting this tabled amendment. We believe that the member actually misunderstands what it is about the legal court record. This is about the legal court record. Section 86N requires the offender to receive a written notice of the warning. In regard to tabled amendment 5:07 p.m, we will not be supporting this because the offender must already be before the court to get the warning. In relation to tabled amendment 5:08 p.m, we will not be supporting this one. We just believe it's unnecessary. In relation to amendment 5:09 p.m, we will not be voting for this one either. The additional first warning is necessary if a first warning falls away on appeal and to reinforce consequences for the offender. In relation to tabled amendment 5:10 p.m, we will not be voting for this one either. Its additional first warning is actually necessary. In relation to tabled amendment 5:11 p.m, we will not be voting for this. Section 86L refers to Stage 3 to ensure offenders get an additional subsequent warning if they commit another third strike offence. We need to keep reinforcing these consequences. In relation to tabled amendment 5:12 p.m, we are voting this one down. In relation to, well, the reason why is because it's Clause 7, new section 86M1, delete that. 86M after before the court at insert the. I don't think it's necessary. There's no comment for that. In relation to tabled amendment 5:13 p.m, we will be voting this down. The current thresholds, we believe, strike the right balance. In relation to tabled amendment 5:14 p.m, we will also be voting down. The courts will be doing this anyway. In relation to 5:15 p.m, we will be voting this down. The oral warning is the primary warning that the offender receives. The written notice is a written reminder, and it also reinforces to the individual that they have received that warning. In relation to tabled amendment 5:16 p.m, we will vote this down. We think the existing thresholds in the bill, again, strike the right balance. In relation to the tabled amendment numbered 5:17 p.m, we will not be voting for this. Offenders should face serious consequences for repeat offending. There is a manifest injustice exception. In relation to tabled amendment 5:18 p.m, we will not be voting for this. The bill provides that offenders who commit murder face appropriately lengthy sentences. In relation to tabled amendment 5:19 p.m, we will not be voting for this. It's a misunderstanding, we believe, of the provision of preventative detention it's a misunderstanding of the provision. Preventative detention remains available in the usual way, the same as the previous regime. In relation to tabled amendment 5:20 p.m,
call the Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will not be voting for this. The bill provides appropriately lengthy sentences for murder at Stage 3. In relation to tabled amendment 5:21 p.m, we will not be voting for this. We believe it's unnecessary because the court can already do this. In relation to tabled amendment 5:22 p.m, we will be voting this down. It's not duplicative. These are about something different. In relation to tabled amendment 5:23 p.m, we won't be voting for this. It's the same as the previous regime and provides certainty. In relation to the tabled amendment 5:24 p.m, we will not be voting for this. It's unnecessary and can be covered by the manifestly unjust exception. In relation to tabled amendment 5:25 p.m, we will also be voting this one down because we believe it is unnecessary. This is adding items to the list that are already covered. In relation to tabled amendment 5:26 p.m, we will be voting this down. The court already has discretion in deciding about the qualifying sentences. And finally, in relation to tabled amendment 5:27 p.m, we'll be voting that down. These are both serious, violent offences with high maximum penalties. Section 234 and for robbery, for example, gives you 10 years. All of the qualifying offences have at least a 7-year minimum sentence.
And she didn't answer Ginny's question, which I really wanted to know what the answer was going to be.
Right, so let's talk about Ginny's question. Ginny brings up some really good points about administration. We've seen the cuts to public services, especially to administration, which, you know, there's going to be communication problems in the justice system with all those cuts, you know.
Especially when everything's done by paper.
Yep, she's like, hey, are people going to get notified that they have a strike? You know, it's like come on.
One thing I want to say is that the coalition, when it comes to crime, the current coalition government is doing really poorly on crime.
Yes.
And for example, if the government really cared, some of you may know there was recently, I think some of you may know about a Animates petition that was calling for the sale, that was calling for the prohibition on the sale of private fireworks or something.
Somewhat familiar.
I believe it's been referred to Select Committee because it got over, I think, 75,000 signatures.
Yep.
If the government really cared, they should really look into the private sale of fireworks as well, as the harm it's causing for people's pets and animals. So, in my opinion, this government can't be taken seriously.
No,
Because,
they can't.
for example, I think Efeso Collins, who died recently, as early as 2019, he had campaigned for the prohibition on the sale of fireworks and fireworks displays be left to local councils or regional councils and hold public displays, which is a safer option.
Yeah. We will move on to the next. So we won't keep watching what happened that night. Let's look what happened the following morning.
Oh, jeez.
Nicole McKee probably had a short sleep.
I think following morning was just a scene ensued at Parliament.
I think the next morning is Frozen. Any moment now. Sam? I don't think it's playing for anyone else.
Oh.
Was it playing for you?
Yes.
It wasn't playing. We were just sitting here awkwardly going, where's Sam?
I'm listening to the whole thing and I'm like, yeah, okay. I see what's happened. Okay. Let's kick off again.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, tēnā tātou katoa te whare. Just in closing last night, I did recall the Minister standing, Mr. Chair, and speaking to, or reading, which is not quite the same as speaking and thinking one's thoughts through oneself. So just reading off a paper and landing with the same old, I won't be dealing with this, I won't be voting it. I think it is more than a disrespect, it is a neglect on the Minister's part. So to that end, the Minister talked about rehabilitation. The assumption about rehabilitation is that there has been habilitation in the first place, which if you know what you're talking about on the subject, you will know that that is just not the case. It is a myth to suggest that rehabilitation can even occur when one doesn't truly understand and know the issues that exist in this context. So just to help you out, given my own training in this space, which it seems most have a gap of knowledge in this regard. The other thing that I do want to draw to the Minister's attention in my amendments, which of course clearly she regurgitated her boss's kōrero, which is, you know, Māoris and tiriti and all of that stuff has no place. I want to ask the Minister to explain whether she understands the concept of hohau e rongo. So that's referred to, when I talk about, just to help you understand in English, restorative justice. The concept of that is a very old and important concept in action. that might be missing, it might be a gap of knowledge. But I can assure you, what is now called restorative justice, which you should know, originates from family group conferencing, which originates from whānau hui, which originates from the Children and Young Persons and Their Families Act, 1989. So all of that work, that Māori intelligence and work, was provided to now the point and what the mainstream calls restorative justice. But the essence of it comes from Hohau Te Rongo. So I'm curious that the Minister might know what that is, and I'd be interested that she see if she can explain that in the context of her rejecting outright amendments, which I know that two-party think that way because sadly it shows up in their majority of racist rhetoric. Thank you.
A point of order, Cameron Luxon. I think we can fairly take, well, I personally think it's a fair place to take offence when you hear someone say how that, when you're...
Oh, this guy again.
Final comment from the member.
The point of order, Dr. Duncan Webb, I understand some advice on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This House has explored allegations of racism and where they, the extent to which they can be made at some length in this House, and it's very clear that in terms of there's a convention that point of order taken in silence.
Let's hear this point of order in silence, Dr. Duncan Webb.
And the fact is that it's well established that criticisms of policies and positions and legislation may be called racist, whereas allegations of that nature directed against a person are out of order, and that's a well established convention.
I'm going to just take some advice on this. My understanding that is that Dr. Duncan Webb's assessment is correct, but I'm just getting some advice on that, and I would like to continue, and then we will come back to this. But I will ask members to focus their contributions on specific clauses. I've been going through the notes from last night, and there was a rich debate from what I can see, and a number of points have been raised, and there's a lot of analysis has been had. But I do want you to be specific to clauses and in terms of your responses to the Minister. I'll take the next call.
Mr. Chair.
Honourable Nicole McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member from the Māori Party, when I'm reading, especially when it comes to amendment papers or tabled papers which have no reference, are totally out of scope to this bill, I will ensure that I do read, because from this position it is important that we are accurate and have our wording correct. So there is a need, when there are a number of amendment papers, to make sure that we address the paper itself and what it is that needs to be read out, so the member understands that they are well out of scope and should probably look to the bill and how the bill is read in itself.
She knows a lot about scopes.
Rehabilitation, as I had mentioned last night in one of my speeches, the rehabilitation is still available to prisoners, including education. So I'm not quite sure what the member is on there. And in regard to the debate that member keeps bringing up, saying that the party or the government is racist, I think what the member needs to do is have a look at the bill and realise that the bill is not based on race. The bill is based on bad behaviour. The bill is based on those that create the most serious, violent and sexual crimes, not on race.
Far out. That was a fiery response. Well, the good news is at least they had a different person in the in the chairman's seat. So at least whoever was on last night, if it wasn't Barbara, she at least got to have a sleeper.
Nicole's very dedicated. I mean, she's been sitting there for 24 hours. No. Yeah. Okay. So, is it racist to point out that certain demographics are more prone to being victims of crime or committing crime because of their socio-economic position in society? I personally don't think it is. You know, if you grow up in poverty, you're probably more likely to commit criminality, especially burglary and other offences, because you're desperate for money. Your needs are not being met. Yes. So, yeah, there is a correlation there between, unfortunately, poverty and crime and neglect and all that stuff, which, you know, leads to aggressive criminality in adulthood. Now I've lost my train of thought. But there you go. That's ADHD for you. But anyways, but yeah, so it's not, I mean, is it about race? Well, unfortunately, Māori people tend to be overrepresented in the stats, and it's important to figure out why they're overrepresented in the stats, and a lot of it is connected to poverty, unfortunately, and neglect and all that stuff. So, yeah, can't ignore that fact.
Just to add to Laura, the free strikes bill will also catch people who live out on the streets as well.
Yes.
Yep. That is what I'm worried about. They don't have a choice to be out living on the streets. It's not they were not, how is it? They shouldn't be forced to do that. And the only way to survive is probably they don't have a choice on how to get their food, or otherwise they just might end up ill. And
not every community actually has churches that go out and help feed the community.
Or community services.
Yeah. That is, so in turn, yes, you end up with more theft as a result from homeless community. I mean, I know one who was sleeping in Newtown School, and I definitely know there was no theft happening in her case, but I do know that, she was vulnerable. She felt most comfortable sleeping in the school grounds because for her, that was the safest place she could stay. I do know that she used to, she would go to the community places to sit there and be fed, but like in Wellington, we got the Wellington City Mission, but in Ekatona, there's nothing.
Oh yeah, there's nothing. We know there's nothing, but also, I mean, when you've got mental health issues as well, that can contribute to homelessness, as Alex was saying. It can also contribute to violent outbursts if you've got mentally ill people that are very desperate for help. That's another thing that can't be ignored, and violent crimes fall under the 3 strikes legislation that's being proposed. So, I am really concerned about that. Preventable crimes.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what James Meager has to ask.
I want to address the points made around the Minister not supporting particular amendments, which we've covered off in a lot of detail. And I remind Dr. Webb that last night we indicated that we also didn't support the amendments, and I've checked with my colleagues in the ACT Party New Zealand First, and they won't be supporting the amendments either. So just to give Dr. Webb some assurance that this side of the House won't be supporting the amendments the Minister has already well and truly covered off. And also, I'll give the Minister a chance to address Dr. Webb's tabled amendment from this morning, whether or not the Minister can indicate she thinks that their amendment should be supported. I reviewed it and I didn't think it was one that we would support, and I want to get the Minister's view on that as well. It's good that Dr. Webb spent some time doing some homework last night. I also did some homework. I spent a good couple of hours after the session last night just reviewing what we'd gone through, because I was wanting to come to the House this morning and make some substantive contributions on the clauses in the bill that haven't actually been covered off. And of course, we had Dr. Shunan yesterday covering off clause 3 around inconsistencies and questions around permanent records, and Dr. Webb also touched on the manifestly unjust provisions in 5 and 6. And then both of Dr. Webb and Dr. Shunan and members, and also Jenny Anderson, then spoke at length on clause 7, which is the operative clause around how the 3-strike system works. And then, of course, the Minister this morning gave a very fulsome answer to that, and I want to thank the Minister for providing, I think, some quite detailed answers to questions. Some of the calls are quite long, and I found it hard to discern the questions from them, because over 5 minutes it's hard to find where the questions have come from. So hopefully the shorter and sharper the calls, the more detail we can extract. And obviously the Chair does a great job of picking up where the questions are, and that's why he's in the chair and we sit over here on the benches. And I just wanted to the points, the new material I wanted to raise was, given that we have covered off all the trajectory, all the material in clause 7, it's just heading now towards clauses 11 and 12. And just to get the Minister's confirmation that my understanding is correct, in that clause 11 inserts amends actually schedule 1AA, and that is to do with the reactivation of previous strikes, which Dr. Webb covered off last night in quite a amount of detail, and clause 12, which inserts new schedule 1AB in schedule 2, and that of course lists the qualifying offences that will be provided in the scheme, which Dr. Webb also covered off in quite a amount of detail last night. So if I can just get the Minister's confirmation that that's my understanding of how those 2 clauses operate, and that the Minister's comfortable that she addressed the questions in those schedules posed by Dr. Webb last night, and then I'm very much looking forward to continuing on into part 2 very shortly.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a bit there for me to unpack, so please bear with me. I'm going to start with the Green member's contribution and see if I can clarify again in a way that is more helpful to the member. In regard to 86U, clause 86U, subsection 2, the questions that the member asked me is actually covered by section 86U, subsection 2A. It covers the additional first warnings under section 86KA. In regard to rewarning people after they have left prison, the intention is not to do that, but I can assure the member that should a person be in prison and they commit another crime, they're likely to receive another warning, and they'll be told about it again at that stage. In regard to the court impacts as well, which the member had mentioned, in 86M subsection 2 is the reference that I will give you. It will be infrequent that a person will have to go back to court, but there will be a few cases expected. It could be where the court omits to give the warning, and judicial education and the 6-month preparation for the implementation of this law will help with that, because that's where the training of court staff and the judiciary will be undertaken. So there, of course, will be the other exception where, say, a person appeals a decision to the Court of Appeal. It is usual, not the only way that it occurs, but often a judgment is reserved and delivered later. Therefore, the offender is not always in court at that time. This means that the offender will have to go back to the original court in order to receive the sentence or the warning, or, if the case may be, have the warning removed. But it will need to be done face-to-face, and a person will need to be recalled if the appeal is successful or not. The warnings will be communicated to the offender, and the court can use whatever words that they wish to use to be able to help that individual understand what's happening. So it's not like they'll be reading from a script. They'll actually be able to understand the scenario that that individual will be in.
Okay.
Sorry, how is the person supposed to be notified that they got a strike? She said something about going back to the original court. Like,
if you have a sentence, say, and you've appealed if you've appealed something, if you've appealed and it's been overturned, typically it has to go back to the original court to be resentenced.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is a convention there, and usually it's back to the original judge who handled the case, unless that judge has been removed from the case.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
and I mean, and I would be saying that not just based on New Zealand precedent. This is quite universal across the world.
Yeah.
But it's the original judge that tends to deal with if there are sentencing measures going on. And it's quite amazing from the chat not talking so positively about Nicole McKee tonight, because I remember on other shows they were singing her praises of she knows her bill, she knows her shit. And this time around they're not giving her the same degree of kindness.
Oh,
let me say one thing about Nicole McKee. She acts like stuff. If anyone's been to Hong Kong, I was actually brought up in Hong Kong. Nicole McKee has the same mentality as a person from mainland China. They always show themselves as, always correct, and they can do no wrong.
Oh,
in this case, Nicole McKee is very similar to some of the people who are described from mainland China, and when they're challenged,
like a member of the CCP.
Yeah,
wow,
that's who I would compare Nicole McKee to. They do not like to be challenged when they're wrong, and that is what Nicole McKee has shown tonight.
Yeah, no, and I've heard that as well, and I've seen that between mainland China and Hong Kong Chinese people. There is that difference between them, and for Kiwi Skirt, I wouldn't sit there and say you were the person who sat there and said positive things about her. I just remember that was comments on a previous bill that Nicole McKee was doing, which I think there might have been one that was actually supported by the House as well. So, yeah, it was quite some time ago since that comment was done. Yeah. Okay, let's see what Tracy McKellen has to say.
And thank you, fellow members. Thank you, members from across the House, for taking the opportunity to summarise and school us on what we should and should not be asking, or what we should or should not have comprehended from what the Minister has chosen to answer to date. Whilst the members from across the House may think that the questions have been well traversed and well answered, they're as clear as mud in some cases, so they will continue to be asked. The Minister has said that the whole purpose of this bill is to provide a consistent and certain consequence, which I think is a little bit ironic given the state of affairs in this committee of the whole House stage, where we have preemptive explanation and splaining going on, where we have a Minister refusing essentially to engage in some debate and arbitrarily just ruling it out of scope if it doesn't suit her purposes. But I've still got some genuine questions because I don't understand the logistics of how some of this is going to work. When the Minister says, for instance, that the offenders will have, well, the people who are going to get the strikeys will have received and therefore understood a warning, there's a huge assumption, and the word understood is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. It's not okay for a Minister to sit in the chair and just say that the court staff, after a brief period of 6 months of preparation, in which time all of the IT, all of the training, there's an awful lot going on in a 6-month period, to have logistical preparation for an efficient and effective system to be carried out. And during that period of time, they're able to use some words, and therefore people will understand. My colleague from the Green Party asked some legitimate questions about individuals' capacity to have sufficient understanding to understand what is an incredibly complex warning system. Having sat through the select committee process and having the opportunity to ask experts, officials, direct, robust questions about stepping us through the complexity of this, sometimes the answers provided made it less clear rather than more clear. So you can only imagine standing in a courtroom being told that you're getting a first warning about something. So what I really want to know is, whilst an awful lot of work has gone into amending and rewriting, and all of the focus has been from the impetus of the court or the minister or the party and the legislation, what work has gone into ensuring that there actually is some understanding, or testing understanding? You know, do people leave the courtroom and have to sign something to say that they understood? What happens when an oral warning is given and then it's assumedly written, backed up by a written confirmation? If one or t'other doesn't happen, how does that impact on the one that does? I agree with my colleague, the Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb, that there's torturous language throughout this, and high anxiety in the context in which all of this is supposed to actually operate on the ground. So I think there are still questions that need to be asked, and still questions that need to be answered without flippancy, as if the questions are an inconvenience or as if they are on purpose being silly to slow proceedings, because they're not. This whole process has been fraught with misunderstanding, and this is the only chance we get now, whilst the rest of it happens during urgency, to actually ask those questions. Some of us would prefer, we didn't choose to introduce this horrible bill, but some of us would prefer that it at least went out in as good a shape as possible on our watch. So I don't begrudge the fact that we're able to ask questions. One of the things that, again, remains completely unanswered is going back to 82A, insofar as the the additional consequences for certain repeated offending must not be taken into account in determining length of sentence. And as was mentioned last night, but not sufficiently answered, it's that sentence in and itself does a lot of heavy lifting. It's absolutely assuming that because it's written down somewhere, therefore that will occur. You can't unknow what you don't unknow. It's like asking someone not to think of polar bears, and then of course that's all they can think of. There are means by which in other fields...
Mr.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm just going to carry on with my answers to the questions that James Meagher had asked me in regard to clauses 11 and clause 12, which relate to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 of the bill. Schedule 1, or clause 11, is relating to the...
Well, I'm cutting you off, Nicole, because you're not answering Tracy's questions.
Yeah, I thought she answered sorry, I thought she asked a really good question.
I can actually know, I know what actually going through that is a recent situation. I've been on the receiving end of that. You understand? No, you didn't follow due process. And that itself, and I mean, for that particular person, I got issued 3 punishments in the process.
Jeez.
And including to the point of having me banned from all events in Wellington. Something she had no control over. While she was standing an abusive thug, blocking me from walking away from the situation. Like a domestic violence person. She didn't mention the gender of the person, but hey, you know, that sort of thing there. But sitting there and trying to say, do you understand? If you're confused by what's happening, you're not going to understand. If it's going over your head, you're not going to understand. If they're speaking legal words that, you know, that you don't understand, like expose, you're going to be a bit confused by what's going to happen. And I mean, you know, if you're on a duty lawyer who's only known you 5 minutes before things are happening, they're not even going to be up to scratch to be able to even sit there and try to get you somewhat informed. It's like, how do you actually explain that to someone if it's been all gumbled and who knows what?
One concern which I have when it comes to court hearings, some people with disabilities can't handle being in court, if you know what I'm saying, or are so in a way that I would describe, like they don't like being put in a really tough situation, such as court or in the justice system. And for example, if someone is caught within that 3 strikes law and they have a disability, they may not react well to it, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah,
exactly. Especially if it's you know, was it someone that say like autism?
Yeah.
That may trigger the wrong response. And usually, you know, it's like, you know, especially if it's undiagnosed or unknown, that can also add to the problem. And in turn, that slows things down or potentially could render the wrong sentence or someone being held on remand with possibly that wasn't the right option. There can be all sorts of things there. In the United States, that's had people lead to ridiculous bail amounts being applied, which means they get held in jail awaiting bond release. In fact, that's something we don't have in New Zealand, but I mean, that's a flow-on effect of that, especially when you have someone who possibly doesn't react the way that people may think someone should react. Now, we've had enough of Nicole McKee.
That's Nicole for one night.
Yeah. Just like we had enough of, you know. Now, for those at home, if you've got mouthwash, go and gargle your throat. David Seymour's coming in the room because Brooke Van Velden couldn't make it. So let's kick off with David Seymour on the Employee Relations Pay Deductions for Partial Strikes Amendment Bill.
This is going to be fun.
We're going to learn a lot. Well, we hope we do.
To consider the bill. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be reported to the House by the 22nd of April 2025. Mr. Speaker, the Employment Relations Pay Deductions for Partial Strikes Amendment Bill reintroduces the ability of employers to make pay deductions in response to partial strikes. This change to collective bargaining settings will provide a far more effective and efficient bargaining environment where rights and consequences are more balanced and which minimises potential disruption to public services. We have seen partial strikes result in patients facing delays to receiving medical scans and treatment due to medical staff limiting the number of scans they completed each day, and kids missing out on education due to teachers refusing to teach certain year groups on certain days. However, in spite of these inconveniences created by the withdrawal of people's work, there were no pay packet consequences for the medical staff or teachers involved in these partial strikes. Earlier this year, train operators in Wellington undertook a work-to-rule industrial action, including refusing shift changes, which led to disruption for travellers. And currently, the New Zealand Defence Force Public Service Association union members are working to rule. They've been taking coordinated breaks and stopped working at heights or off-site. The Minister of Defence has responded by authorising uniformed personnel to cover civilian work in selected areas. Needless to say, this is a rare move from the Minister of Defence, and it is a shame that it's been made necessary by this industrial action. On the other hand, when a full strike occurs, employers can respond by suspending the employees and not providing pay. In this situation, there are negative consequences for both sides. The employees lose pay, the employer loses output. This provides an incentive for both sides to cease industrial action and return to the bargaining table as soon as possible. The same cannot be said for partial strike action under the current rules. If an employee is engaged in a partial strike, the employer's options are to either accept the partial strike action or to lock out or suspend the employees for the duration of the strike. Employers who do not want to be so heavy-handed in their response have no choice but to continue to pay the partially striking workers in full. There is currently no provision to allow a more nuanced or proportionate response, as would be normal in a society where people believe in cause and effects thinking. The ability to make pay deductions in response to partial strikes was introduced in 2014 as part of a package of amendments aimed at ensuring a flexible and fair employment relations framework for both employees and employers. In 2018, the previous government removed employers' ability to reduce pay in response to partial strikes. Now, once this bill becomes law, an employer will not have to make a pay deduction in response to partial strikes. Under this bill, it will be an option for an employer involved in a negotiation. Employers will again be able to respond to partial strikes by being able to either reduce an employee's pay by a proportionate amount or deduct 10% of their pay. The ability to make a fixed deduction of 10% gives employers a choice in situations where it may be difficult to calculate a proportionate pay deduction. For example, for a large workforce, without the option to make it a fixed deduction, the administrative costs of calculating the proportion of work impacted could mean that it is not practical for some employers to make a deduction. Restoring employers' ability to make pay deductions for partial strikes could help incentivise both parties to return to the bargaining table and reach agreement sooner. This will reduce the impacts on communities that result from ongoing industrial action. I consider that enabling employers to make partial pay deductions provides the opportunity for a more balanced and appropriate response to partial strikes. It's also more consistent with the approach used in Australia and the United Kingdom. While I recognise the entitlement of employees to strike in support of their collective bargaining claims, they should not be able to do it at no cost to themselves, effectively putting the cost on the employer. And as we heard in the case of school children and their parents and those patients waiting for vital medical scans, actually putting the cost onto the customers or the patients or the students of their employer. In conclusion, this bill will provide employers with a specific response to partial strikes by reintroducing the ability to make pay deductions in response to partial strikes. It is sensible, proportionate change that should minimise potential disruption to public services. All New Zealanders will be able to have their say on the bill when it goes to Select Committee. Mr Speaker, I just hasten to add that I have brought this bill and taken the speech on behalf of the Minister for Workplace Relations, the Honourable Brooke Van Velden. And I have to say that while she could not be in the House today, she is doing a superb job across the portfolio of making our labour laws make sense for contractors, with holidays pay, with personal grievances. And I hear Camilla Bellich, the one-time employment lawyer, braying away there, saying she's constantly taking risks. Actually, she's not. And it says something about Camilla Bellich's attitude towards the workers, that she believes something like this bill, the idea that if you work, you get paid. If you don't work, you don't get paid. If you work less, you get paid less. If you work more, you get paid more. To most New Zealanders, this kind of logic is common sense and first nature.
And if you have a right to strike, you have a right to strike.
That you should be able to go on strike, inconvenience patients, inconvenience students, inconvenience parents, and still get paid the full amount, all the while creating incentives to continue industrial action. Well, Mr Speaker, once upon a time there was a Labour Party that actually believed in public services for the public. Their interest was an equal opportunity for every child to get an education, for every patient, whether or not they had the means to get healthcare. And what do you have today? You have a Labour Party that's going to stand up and complain and say it's an attack on workers to say that if you don't work, you don't get paid, and if you do work, you do get paid, and if you go on strike, you are withholding your work and not working, so you don't get paid. And then
Ms Bellich, I note that you're the next speaker. That might be a good better opportunity than yelling across the House.
Well, Mr Speaker, I've seen Ms Bellich give many speeches, and I'd never contest your ruling, but I'm not entirely sure about that one. Mr Speaker, the thing about it is...
Mr Seymour, sit down. Camilla Bellich. Point of order. You've challenged, criticised the Speaker's ruling, so I've curtailed your speech. So if your point of order is in relation to that, don't bother.
Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, it is, because it was clearly in jest. I was facing significant barracking.
To which, Mr. Seymour, I had intervened, and you didn't need to do that. Sit down, Camel
Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, I've got a right.
Sit down, Mr. Seymour. Oh. Camel Belch.
He's rolling up his sleeves. He's getting ready. He's like, "Come here, boy." He's going to stop playing with the ball soon.
Was like, you can make a speech and then you badger the opposition. Now, the question has to be over a partial strike. Hi there, I refuse to work overtime. Oh, okay, I'm making a mandatory 10% deduction from your pay because I feel like it.
Well, I'm being harassed at work. I don't feel safe.
I'll just say this bill is aimed at Te Whatu Ora workers from what is becoming
aimed at public servants, and it's aimed at Transdev workers such as it's in the ballot member Ray, who's part of the team, which Stacey can probably speak on behalf of Ray.
Hey.
Considering this actually happened.
Hi. Yeah, I was actually jumping in to say my flatmate works for Transdev. So I know a bit about the behind the scenes of what happened with their work to roll strikes and protests.
Mm-hmm.
They have the option to swap trains with people if it works out better for them at the end of their shift, right? That is absolutely fine. People do that all the time. But the reason they went on strike was because the big bosses, there we go, wanted to remove some of their rights and privileges that they get as workers for the company, as well as not increasing their pay. So they refused to take the overtime, even though they get paid an exorbitant amount of money more for overtime shifts, because they wanted the public to understand what they were going through.
David Seymour wants.
They are very constantly made to work through what should be their meal break.
Yep.
They get scheduled on trains so close together that they don't have time to sit down and eat something and rest and relax themselves, even though they have an online thing now, which within the company, that they have to sign off on, saying that they are well rested and capable of doing their shift. And how can they do that if they're not allowed to eat?
Oh,
true.
May I add to something to Stacey? I've seen these in Hong Kong in the early 90s. Hong Kong has a tram and underground train system. I have a huge suspicion that Transdev must have copied either the Hong Kong tramways or the mass transit railway, because when I was in Hong Kong in 1998 for a period of 4 weeks, some of the train drivers or tram drivers had to bring food on board because they couldn't get an adequate lunch break. So they had no choice but to eat at the controls.
Wow.
Yeah. So I suspect Transdev must have copied something from Hong Kong then. Because
or it is typical neoliberalism working process of literally trying to cram things literally into the tiniest gaps.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's evidence. It's more evidence in the bus system than it is in the train system, because the train system, for the way the timetable structures are set up, kind of forces somewhat break depending on the line. If you're on I think it's the Upper Hutt line, it kind of, like the way the timetable is structured, it kind of forces a 10 to 15 minute turnaround. But I do remember on the Kapiti line, the turnaround time used to be 2-3 minutes at Parapara train station. You know, sometimes not long enough to go to the toilet.
It's delayed.
Yeah, exactly. You know, what happens if your service is delayed? Yeah. such as a freight train going in or out of the yard, can sit down there and stop, at AM peak, can sit there and slow 2 trains moving into the station, because if it comes from the North Island main trunk line, it stops the hut line functioning while it crosses the centre points.
Well, I mean, I was looking at what the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment had to say in their recommendations to Brooke Van Velden. They said that allowing employees to deduct wages for partial strikes means that workers are more likely to abandon or refuse to participate in the partial strike action, weakening workers' bargaining position, or it may force workers to fully withdraw labour, causing disputes to escalate. Right? That was advice to Brooke.
Yeah. And also, what happens if you have a situation where, a misunderstanding, it's a partial strike, I'm the poor, I'm right, deduction made.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which, is breach of the Wage Protection Act.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is going to screw over so many workers.
And it's going to get tied up in the courts. It's going to tie up the ERA and slow things down. Hopefully at Select Committee we can iron out, what is a guideline of a partial strike? You refusing to do overtime in a form of partial strike shouldn't warrant a pay deduction, because you're doing what your contracted hours are or your contracted shift.
So, sorry, you're silent quitting. Okay, we're going to give you a 10% deduction. It's like, give me a bloody break.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what Camilla Ballich has to say in response.
See you later.
But it is absolutely not. The harmony that has presided over this House in relation to this urgency motion has well and truly ended with this terrible bill, which does attack workers' rights and does take working New Zealanders backwards, both literally in the sense that this was a law that used to apply. Does the ACT Party have no new ideas apart from rehashing things that were tried and tested and found to have failed? There is no evidence for this bill to go ahead at all. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, not only does this bill take workers backwards, but there is absolutely no evidence provided in the regulatory impact statement on the effectiveness of this bill, or the effect is actually needed at all. In fact, the regulatory impact statement goes into great detail of the fact that there couldn't be proper assessments done on this bill, and the bill itself only partially meets the quality assurance standards of MB, the very ministry who drafted this bill. Why is the ACT Party deciding to, at every attempt, bring ideological changes to this House which simply do not work in practice, do not take New Zealand workplaces forward, and actually have no evidential basis, not only to bring them forward, but also with not sufficient time for their own officials to actually scrutinise them and put them through the proper processes? This is absolutely terrible, Mr. Speaker. And I want to speak to, I don't have much time as it's a first reading, 5 minutes. I want to speak to the real heart of the problem of this bill, and that was, in essence, the interjections that I was making to the previous speaker. This is a bill that does not just apply when people do not work. Partial strikes are often situations where people have things like a union t-shirt on, a badge, a sign on their fire truck. These are all examples of partial strikes that would be covered by this bill. In those circumstances, Mr. Speaker, at the passage of this bill, an employer would be able to deduct 10% or more possibly, they use other type of calculation, of an employee's wages when they have done their job, when they have fulfilled their contractual entitlement, and the only thing that they are doing is taking action to support their bargaining that they're having with the employer. Now, this bill, I would even go as far to say, goes against the object of the Employment Relations Act. The object of the Employment Relations Act is to promote collective bargaining. And what we have seen, and we've seen the CTU state this today, that this bill will do the exact opposite of promoting collective bargaining. This will actually possibly encourage the use of the full withdrawal of labour from workplaces. So encourage more strikes. So be more inconvenient to the public. Mean that people can't access the public services that we all want them to see because they don't have the option of a partial strike without financial penalty. This is a ridiculous proposition to put forward that people should, an employer should be able to dock people's wages, their hard-earned wages, when they have done the job they're contracted to do. This could include things like coaching at schools. That would be impacted by this. If you decided not to do that, if you weren't paid for it, that could be considered a partial strike and you might actually be paid less as a result of that. Doing extra duties, attending a rally during your lunch break, that would be considered coaching. Yeah, like a sports coaching team. It's something that happens quite often in schools, and schools do have industrial relations. So, coaching that people might do is an additional thing to their job. Now, I do note in the bill, and I'm grateful that it does exclude partial strikes for things like health and safety. That is correct. That is the way that it should be. But there are so many other different types of ways that people could be political in their role, supporting the role of their union, their right to collectively bargain, which is protected under the Employment Relations Act, which would be covered by this bill. This is a bill, and I'm looking at members opposite, that stops people being paid the minimum wage if they have a deduction for a partial strike. This is what you're passing today. It could be people who do their entire contracted duties, who do not breach their contract, who do not get paid the minimum wage because they're taking part in their union action for better pay and conditions. This is taking New Zealand workplaces literally backwards to a different time when the law came into place. There is no evidence. There's actually mistakes in this legislation. It has been rushed through. I know that we are having a select committee, and I feel silly saying that I'm grateful for it, but I am. I do not commend it to the House.
Yeah, Camilla, she's absolutely right. I mean, I was looking at, according to Employment New Zealand, since the coalition came to the government, there have been 42 work stoppages that resulted in about $15 million in lost wages. So, yeah, this is absolutely going to have an impact. Under the Labour government, there were less lost wages, even though there were more strikes. So, you know, you're talking about an impact on the economy. That's a lot of people going without pay. That's a lot of people that's unable to support their local businesses. This is not a good bill.
Or, you know, people paying the rents to their landlords.
True.
One of the things I would add, there is a consequence with this bill, with the wage bill, is that if it messes with someone to a point where they're desperate or their salary's gone because for whatever reason or the employer has just ceased employing them, they will do anything just to survive. And if they're pushed into that situation, that shouldn't be happening at all.
I mean, there was a situation which was ruled illegal by the ERA, but NZ Bus, when it was owned by Next Capital, put an indefinite lockout notice on all staff members at NZ Bus because they gave notice and took part of a one-day strike. NZ Bus locked them out indefinitely as a result.
Yep.
And they basically, an injunction, sat down there and did it, considering at this particular point, half of Wellington was not likely to have buses on Anzac Day as a result. Which ended up, lucky enough it did it. Including I was actually looking at going to turn up to the strike with a Portaloo toilet so that they could go inside and go, so they actually had a place to go to the toilet outside the NZ Bus Barn Depot in Kilburnie. Considering the strikes only were held at the Kilburnie Depot, they weren't held at the Eastbourne, the Kaiwhara or the Karori Depot. They all were held at there. And I remember Joanne sitting out there in a deck chair for like 3 hours, like for quite a number of hours, not in uniform, while striking.
I'd just like to point out in that weird speech that David Seymour gave, that he totally forgot that Labour actually stands for workers' rights as well.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, look. It's like, oh, they support people walking away from public services. That's hypocritical. And I'm like, yeah, they're walking away because the working conditions are shitty. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's like Labour also stands for workers' rights as well as public services.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alex?
Something I'd like to add is sometimes I might catch the bus number 83 from Low Hutt into town.
Yeah.
One of the things I would say is I do feel sorry for those drivers because they do look in a bad mood, or I mean, sometimes the drivers are not really happy at all. If you know what I'm
I'll have to talk to one of my contacts who knows a lot of drivers in there. But I mean, I don't know what it's like under Kinetic with NZ Bus, but I do know under Next Capital, it got very toxic.
Something I'd like to see is with 83, 81, and 84, I think the council needs to step in and say we need to do something about those bus routes if the drivers are not happy about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the Eastbourne bus, the Eastbourne one, they do have a different CEA from the rest of the other 3 depots.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, there is a different CEA. Yeah. We will kick off with Te Aotearoa.
That stole Christmas. Here we are, just a couple of weeks out from Christmas, and the workers are getting another kick in the teeth from this government, Mr. Speaker. This legislation is appalling. The government is introducing legislation that will make it easier to penalise workers fighting for better pay and conditions. It is dire, draconian and outright disgraceful, even by this own government's standards, Mr. Speaker. The ability to strike, organise and collectively bargain is a democratic right. These are critical tools that have empowered workers to contest and challenge unfair working conditions and the uneven playing field between them and their bosses. And we did hear comments about concerns about interruptions to public services, and I think we all share that. But you want to know something, Mr. Speaker? If you want to minimise disruptions to public services, you pay people properly. You pay the nurses, you pay the teachers, you pay people properly, Mr. Speaker. Because what's the count now of the number of people across the public sector that have lost their jobs? 6,000, 8,000? I've seen numbers up to 10,000. And everybody across the House, Mr. Speaker, likes to talk a big game about the brain drain. But where do you think these people go? Where do people go when they lose their jobs? They get on a plane and they get out of here to find better work and conditions. Mr. Speaker, the government is also getting ahead of the collective bargaining in the big public sector workforces next year to undermine their ability to strike and try to frighten workers into accepting their miserly offers that are coming. Mr. Speaker, it is so important that we protect workers' rights, that we protect the right to strike as well, and acknowledging the comments of my colleague Camilla Bellich as well. All of those different ways that are expressions of frustration with workers. If you are wearing a T-shirt, if you're all as a part of the partial strike, that will count as your pay getting docked, Mr. Speaker. The different ways that people find their ways to express their frustrations, Mr. Speaker. This is something that should be opposed across the House. Mr. Speaker, the Greens will continue to fight this legislation every step of the way. And just to reiterate that point again, that if we do want to see fewer strikes, you have to pay people properly. You have to pay the nurses properly. You have to pay the teachers properly. You got to pay those people that do all of those different bits and pieces, Mr. Speaker. We have this wonderful saying in Te Reo Māori, Mr. Speaker, which goes, "Ko te amorangi ki mua, ko te hāpai o ki muri," which, if I can translate that into English, if you take care of the front and you take care of the back, that's when everything comes along in a good way, particularly on the marae. You look after the paipai, you look after the kouta, the marae as well. So what we have with this government, Mr. Speaker, is a commitment to gut the back office without any concern with what that means to the front office, Mr. Speaker. This bill is draconian, it is dire and is diabolical. A couple of weeks out from Christmas, this is a kick in the teeth for workers. Workers should be getting ready to organise against this government and make them a one-term government. Mr. Speaker, we oppose this bill.
And I'd just like to bring this up.
Now, there you go.
Nearly 20,000 jobs in Wellington have gone by the end of Q3. So that will be the end of September.
Of course, so this government knows that people are desperate to keep their jobs, so they're less likely to engage in a partial strike. That's why I urge people to join their union.
Yeah, but just so for those who are wondering, with Wellington, that's quite a big number that has been, that has happened in the city of job losses.
Yep. Oh, I would also add Kiwi-Rail staff in the Woburn or Lower Hutt workshops are being given voluntary redundancy.
All over Kiwi-Rail was being given that. I mean, and they'll probably also be given with Nicola's new boats. Just like to sit there and do.
Hey!
And hey, Nicola Willis might consider this a partial strike.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Let's see what Katie Niman's got to say, because we've got to hear what National's got to say.
Katie Neiman.
Mr. Speaker, look, I think it's important to clarify for the House what partial strikes mean and how disruptive they are to the community. Because at the end of the day, I have worked in transport for most of my career, and I have seen examples where bus drivers will turn up for work and they will drive around the route with the door closed and refuse to let passengers on. Or they'll refuse to take revenue to subsidise the ratepayer-funded public transport. All of these things, not only do they detrimentally impact the bottom line of a regional council or a business, but they also affect the customer, the very person that every business and employee or public service and public servant purport to support and be there to work for. And so at the very end of the day, the purpose of this bill is to introduce balance to a situation that is currently out of balance. We are reintroducing a piece of legislation that was revoked in 2018 that is not saying that nobody can strike. It's not saying that nobody can partially strike. It's to say that there actually has to be a consequence for the impact that this has on a business, on a public service, on the customer, on the member of the public that is entitled to that public service or to that service that they are expecting to pay for. Another example is where partial strikes have been in the healthcare system, where, yes, people have turned up to work, but they've taken half the number of, let's just say, MRI scans that they are supposed to. Now, again, not only is this actually putting more pressure on the future workforce, it's actually really a critical healthcare concern. Now, there are examples of this across all sectors. It's not just public transport, it's not just health. It's, in some cases, education, where the teachers, yes, they're on site, they're at the school, and they do that to avoid taking full strike action, which has its own repercussions, but they aren't taking class, or they aren't teaching certain things. Now, who does that disbenefit? It disbenefits the public, and we are here to reintroduce the balance, and that is what this is about. It's all about limiting the effects that strike action takes on the consumer, on the communities and public service, because ultimately, businesses and public service don't have the resources to respond to every single strike action, in this particular case, partial strikes. They have no ability to have compensation or recompense for what happens. And in so many cases, actually, public service or businesses have to put on additional staff that aren't part of the strike action, pay them additionally to the person that they're still paying, because, again, in this case, partial strikes, they might be on site, they might be reporting for duty, but not performing the duty. And so all of this has a cost. And so, at the very least, to expect businesses and public service to be able to take some of that, in this case, 10%, up to 10%, and take that as compensation for whether it's the logistics involved in the disruption, the additional cost of having to put extra staff on, the compensation required for customers, the follow-up that's required when that partial strike action is complete and we have to put extra staff on to cover the backlog of work. All of these things cost. And actually, that is absolutely at a disadvantage to the very people taking partial strike action, because they are bargaining for better terms and conditions or pay. If it's costing more to cover that strike action, what is that doing? Because, again, that's disproportionately affecting those people that are taking partial strike action. So again, I will summarise what I have said today, which is that in the end, this is about putting balance back into a system and a situation where it is disproportionately disadvantaging those people that are entitled to a public service, that at the most part it's people in public service that are disproportionately impacted by this situation. And the reintroduction of balance, bringing something back that we had prior to 2018 that's in step with the rest of the world. It is the norm around the world to be able to take this kind of consequence, that it's a very simple thing to expect that that is what we would do in this case. And so to be throwing our arms in the air saying that this is sending us back into the dark ages is absolutely untrue. It is a proportionate response to something that has a disproportionate impact on the public. And I think that when we go through the select committee process, we will hear just that. And I look forward to that process. I commend this bill to the House.
She cares so much about public jobs that her government that she's a part of is cutting all the public jobs. But also, what does she think? What does she think a strike is? A picnic? No, it's a protest. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to get bosses, especially the government, to provide better work conditions and better pay.
I mean, what would you like? What happened in the United States, where the CEO of the company that declined the highest proportion number of claims getting assassinated?
Yeah,
you know.
Can I say something about Katie Lemon? She's the person who was interviewed on the New Zealand Herald last year, who basically said that the section of the Waitangi to Napier railway line should be turned into a road.
Oh, well, there you go.
Sure. I'm not sure if it's suitable. I mean, half the railway trips are wrapped up in the Esk Valley. Okay, let's see what Mark Patterson, who was part of a party that voted to repeal the law that's been reintroduced.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New Zealand First supports this Employment Relations Pay Deduction for Partial Strikes Amendment Bill. We have always believed in the egalitarian principle that a fair day's work deserves a fair day's pay, but both those two things need to go together. To get your fair day's pay, you do have to do a fair day's work. And to be able to withdraw your labour and still get paid doesn't balance in our view. There should be some consequences, and we absolutely support the right to strike and withdraw your labour. But it cannot be done at the expense of your employee who you're bargaining with. That's a disproportionate balance of power, and exactly the opposite of what the previous bill purported to do. So we do think that this rebalances and is proportionate, and it does incentivise both parties to settle. The employer, if there's a partial strike going on, is still paying a price. They've lost that productivity during that period, and the chance of a spurious walkout is mitigated because there is consequences for people withdrawing their labour, workers withdrawing their labour. So it just is sensible to us. It's balanced. It hopefully will save the nuclear option of having to have a lockout or full strikes, because it will incentivise both parties to come to the table. So that seems fair to us. And we have seen the consequences of this at a number of occasions since the law that we're repealing has come into place. Particularly, I know from personal experience, the teachers' strikes that under the last government, where the teachers were just striking and striking and striking, and the inconvenience to the general public was enormous because we didn't have the flexibility and the parents didn't have the flexibility and had to work around all those scenarios. It was tremendously disruptive to the broader community. And the teachers were able to strike with impunity at that point. And that was under the previous administration. So all these dire catastrophising over there from the Green Party, saying that, just pay people better. Well, that, conceivably they would have been wanting to. They were part of a government and confidence and supply with a government that conceivably would have wanted to pay them as well as they could. But there are real-world consequences. You can only everyone and every government has got a budget they've got to keep to. Every employer has got a budget they've got to keep to. So this balances that out. We've got consequences on either side. It is a sensible bill. It is a balanced bill. So New Zealand First will commend it to the House.
Debbie Naroa-Packer.
Okay.
I mean, okay, so last I just checked how much notice you got to give before you go on strike, right? If you're a union, it's about 14 days, isn't it?
It depends what's in the CEA. It is different per. It's different per CEA. Some of it can be down as low as 24 hours, but some of it could be 14 hours. Typically, stuff that has like 40 hours is like education.
Yeah, but it's not like completely out of the blue. Like, okay, yeah, in the next hour I'm going on strike. I'm not doing work anymore. It's like,
no, you can't get paid, like, you know, effectively you'd have 24 hours notice. And normally you issue a strike warning notice is to warn you this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, and usually you give the boss is usually given terms and conditions, right, that need to be met.
Yeah.
Yeah, in order to prevent a strike or to resolve a strike. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, let's see what happens with the kerfuffle here, because I think there's a bit of kerfuffle coming up.
Oh, kerfuffle.
Out there to make sure that they'll demonise every hard-working, every community, anyone that wants to fight for their rights, what was continuously seen from this government. And while I heard my colleague on the right calling them the Grinch, I just think that's way too kind. You know, what we have here, and I think this probably about this time last year, we were speaking to the reintroduction of the 90-day trials. And that really should be of no surprise that we're here today again, talking about why people shouldn't strike, pretending that we're worried about the services. Actually, what you're worried about is the shareholders' profits. The shareholders' profit margins, because that's effectively what productivity is turning around for you. So let's just remind ourselves what we hear about. And this government's whole tough on crime, now tough on employers, seems to be really the key message.
Point of order, Honourable David Seymour.
I wonder if you might draw the member speaking's attention to Standing Order 112. She's so far spoken for a minute and hasn't actually addressed the bill. She has made a number of imputations about the motivations of the government, to which you might draw your attention to Standing Order 121, I think it is.
That's also the purview of the chair. So thank you for that advice. Carry on, Ms. Naropa.
Thank you. And what we see here is, sadly, a bill that's been forward, a bill called Employment Relations Paid Deductions for Partial Strikes Amendment Bill. And what we see is it's been brought forward here to demonise workers, to demonise and enhance and help bad employers, because it's always been about a good employer will not want to see things carry on. They will not want to see their staff strike, and they will want to mitigate it and come together and negotiate and settle as fast as possible. But what we have here is that, you know, truly, I just want to give a list in respect to this bill and how it relates to marginalised workforces. Wahine Māori and Pacifica are effectively working for free for the rest of the year when they compare to the pay to the average Pākehā man's salary. Over a lifetime, Māori women will have earned over $400,000 less than Pākehā men. Discrimination in the workplace, because this is why we fight for rights. Discrimination in the workplace. We know that Māori are adversely affected. Approximately 93% of Māori have experienced some form of workplace discrimination, as disclosed in findings released just last year. This is why we have strikes. Māori are often represented...
Some references to the bill would be good around that. And some speaking about the bill.
Māori are often represented in sectors including agriculture, construction and hospitality. These types of working environments are notorious and why they are part of the partial striking environment. When we strip workers of their rights to protest and strike against these types of realities, these types of working conditions in place that put bad employers ahead and use the balance of power, because that's really what this bill is about. It's about the balance of power and those in workplaces that are unsafe, those that are sitting there fighting for their rights to be paid better, to be recognised better, to end discrimination. The right to strike is a fundamental democratic right, one that we've been very proud of having in Aotearoa, especially when working conditions become so dire that there is no other means by which to make their voices heard. The amendments to this bill absolutely revoke the democratic rights of workers. In this government, particularly the ACT Party, these amendments expose their true agenda, the agenda to support and look after the profits of the shareholders that we see from entities like, I don't know, an Atlas, revealing not a democratic party, but rather one that would prefer to silence the voices that advocate for change. In this case, better working conditions.
Point of order, David Seymour. But this better not relate to the Speaker or current Speaker and her reference to the bill. That, again, as I've reminded you, is a review of the Speaker.
Well, Mr Speaker, you acknowledged my previous point of order and the member appears to have completely ignored what you said. I would argue that she's now trifling with you and perhaps you could be a bit consistent and sit her down too.
Well, you can argue all you like. Carry
on. Thank you. This bill is not about protecting workers or the general public. It's about protecting unfair, bad employers from any consequences. And really what it comes down to is being able to make sure that those workers are able to deliver these services and that they are working for good employers and that they are able to strike and demand better conditions that cannot put themselves and their jobs at risk. It's simple. A broken workforce means broken services, whether it's healthcare, education or public safety. Te Pāti Māori do not support this bill.
Man, it would suck working for the ACT Party. That's all I can say based on this bill. Holy crap, I would hate to work for them.
Your name is called Brooke Van Velden.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. Well, I would say that's the last bit of the bills. Anything you want to say, Alex?
About that, pay. I mean, to be honest, what Brooke Weldon is doing is going to lead to more workers striking. To be honest,
yeah,
it's not going to
full-scale strikes, not partial.
Yeah. It's going to lead to full strikes eventually.
Yeah.
So,
see union numbers increase.
Yeah.
Now, Stacey wanted to bring in something before we have the final parts of our show. Would you like to jump back in, Stacey? And now she's trying to remember how to tune herself in.
Sure, hi. No, I was organising my life.
So we're having a bit of an unusual segment here, but this is very useful. So Stacey is...
We are. So yeah, this is something that I saw today. It's not actually going through Parliament, but you can make submissions directly to the Ministry of Health. Submissions close on Monday, the 20th of January, 2025.
Well, yep. That sounds like Wellington Anniversary Day.
That sounds right. And so I saw a video saying that this is trying to be pushed through during the summer break while everybody's busy off doing their own things and not on what's going on in the rest of the world. So I have a few links that I will drop in the chat shortly. I'm not gonna bother screen sharing or anything, but which one did I want? One moment. There we go. So we're talking about the puberty blockers review.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So coming from genderminorities.com, talking about the discrimination of puberty blockers and how they are dispensed. Discrimination is being treated differently and worse. Sex-based discrimination is when this is done on the basis of a person's sex. This includes sex characteristics and assignment of sex, which is based on sex characteristics. Blocking hormones during puberty is normal. It is the usual medical approach to children with unwanted sex characteristics, unless those children are transgender. The boy who is cisgender develops breasts, gynecomastia, an intersex condition, and if he is distressed by this, then he will be offered medical care. This is often in the form of liposuction to remove the unwanted breast tissue and hormonal interventions if necessary. If a cisgender girl grows facial hair, hirsutism, might be saying that wrong, and if she is distressed by this, then she will be offered medical care. This will often be permanent facial hair removal and hormonal interventions. Transgender intersex people are likely to be restricted from receiving treatments under the same restrictions as other transgender people. Cisgender intersex people, such as boys with gynecomastia, will still receive treatment. Intersex people are also likely to be given treatments without their consent, which is also relevant and which genderminorities.com will talk about further down the page. I'm not going to get into that right now, though. We'll end up going way more over time than we already are. Transgender people should have the same rights as cisgender people. Transgender people are people. They live here. They are part of our communities. People need to learn to accept this and treat them as a regular human being. When cisgender people get offered these medications and treatments, success is measured by whether the treatment alters that person's sex characteristics. But it seems that the logic of the review is that success for transgender people hinges on the ability to prove that these treatments made them psychologically stable, even in situations where they had no family support.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence review downgraded evidence if transgender people were receiving family support. This is how the evidence review into puberty blockers was set up, to only review this treatment when transgender people receive it, to use different success measures than the standard ones, and to ignore any risks to cisgender people who receive the same treatments. When a transgender woman has low estrogen, she has to get diagnosed with the transgender-specific gender dysphoria diagnosis. Cisgender women just get treated like women in the first place. This is sex-based discrimination. And now I'm going to quickly jump to PASA, Professional Association for Transgender Health, Aotearoa. I have actually lost the section that I wanted to read out from that, so I will just drop the link in the comments after I'm done.
Yep.
And insideout.org.nz. At the end of November, Manatu Hawora, the Ministry of Health, released their long-awaited evidence brief and position statement into the puberty blockers use for trans children. Along with this, the government has asked them to open up public consultation on whether additional restrictions need to be put in place for trans children accessing puberty blockers. Wait, that seems strange? Absolutely it is. It's highly unusual and totally inappropriate to open up public consultation for a medical matter that, by the ministry's own press release, affects a little over 100 children per year. So they ask, why are they just considering restrictions for trans children? Why not cisgender kids using them for precocious puberty? They say, good question. The ministry doesn't have an answer to that other than trying to claim that they're actually quite different. But let's be clear. If there are serious risks, there's no reason why they wouldn't apply to other children using them too. This move by the government and the Ministry of Health is an act of discrimination, attempting to introduce restrictions on one population's right to access healthcare. You can also find a link to the online form in the Inside Out article on this, which I will also be posting a link to. Health.govt.nz. So the Ministry of Health's website states that health agencies are now working to develop an appropriate response for the New Zealand context. This includes strengthening the evidence base and developing updated guidelines for clinicians. So if I jump to the NZ Herald article on it, the new precautionary approach signals the need for clinicians to exercise caution in prescribing, including that prescribing should only be initiated by clinicians who are experienced in providing gender-affirming care and are part of an interprofessional team offering a full range of supports to young people presenting with gender identity issues. So a big reason that I wanted to bring this up is because I have a lot of friends who are transgender. I have friends who have children who are currently going through gender dysphoria. My youngest sibling is also experiencing gender dysphoria, and my sibling and I don't personally view it as being trans, but just not always wanting to be the gender that you're assigned at birth. And honestly, I have the same problem. Like, I am a big supporter of the rainbow communities, and it doesn't matter what part of it you fall into. I am there for you. I love you. You are accepted. You are a human. You are a part of this world, and you are loved. And please know that. Even if it's not by the people in your immediate circle, there are people out there that love you. So
I think half the panel. Oh, I think most of this panel is gay, so we're all in agreement. I'm gay, so hey.
Exactly. Yes, and I'm not straight. So there we go.
There we go.
I'm not only an ally, I am part of the community. But I will still ally myself to the parts of the community that I don't identify with.
Yep.
So yeah, I will start dropping all those links into the comments. If you are going to make a submission, I am not going to say, please make a submission in the same way that I feel, because that's not how this works. But please remember that it is not only for people's physical sexual identity, it is for their mental health. It is for their confidence that they feel in themselves. It is making them stronger and feel accepted and present themselves the way that they not only want but need to be seen. So please, if you don't support this and you want to make a submission, please just keep that in mind. That's all I ask. But I will start dropping those in the comments and bugger off and let you guys wrap up.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cheers, guys.
Have a nice evening, Stacey.
Okay, so let's get to the bits about the bills that are coming up for the second time today. The evidence giving of Family Violence Amendment Bill closes on Thursday the 19th. The Policing Vetting Amendment Bill submissions close on the 19th of December. The Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protection Legislation Bill closes on 19th of December. The Mental Health Bill closes on the 20th of December. The big one, the Treaty Principles Bill, closes on the 7th of January. And the Aotearoa Tamariki Responding to Serious Youth Offending Amendment Bill closes on Thursday the 9th of January. So there's quite a fair bit of submission work to get on. And,
oh boy.
Yeah.
May I say something about that family violence bill? I would encourage people who have been through family violence to make a submission supporting how's it when someone leaves the family violence amendment bill. I would encourage people who have survived family violence to make
this one here.
Yes, to make submissions supporting that. If someone was formerly in a relationship or the marriage has gone into separation, that there should be avenues to speed up the division of assets or which money or whichever, so people don't have to live it out rough, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, or live 2 years potentially to sit there and go through that. And I mean, and also just those who are wondering, domestic violence isn't limited to being in a relationship or a relation of the perpetrator. It is effectively a person in the same household committing the offence. That is domestic violence. So yeah, as some people sit there and say only husbands and wife can have that, that is not true. Considering my adult experience of domestic violence weren't relationships, they were flatmates.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think something that we could say the divvy up of assets or separation settlements need to speed up. That's waiting 2 years is a very long time.
Yeah, no, there are. I do remember. I'm not sure if there was a members' bill that was looking at trying to make a no-faults divorce if there's domestic violence, and it is to basically you can use that as an expedited case to cause make a divorce happen sooner. Because I mean, we now have no-fault divorce, but we did have at one point in time where you actually had to have fault, including my great-grandmother and great-grandfather were part of that process back in the 1930s, and that was where the division between Grandma and Auntie Gwen happened, where Grandma went to Wellington with my great-grandfather, and Auntie Gwen went north with my great-grandmother to Auckland. But at that point in time, we didn't even have a thing called the family court. We probably had the equivalent of what we now know as the district court, and that was probably where that sort of stuff would have been dealt with. Yeah. And thank you, Stacey, for pumping all those bills into the chat as well. As I can see, it's just going ding, 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 ding. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, panel, for joining us. Feel free to stay after for after-show chats. And for those who are watching, join us for our end of 2023 show next Sunday, where we can bring up the highlights, the lowlights, our best speeches, our worst ones, and all sorts of things over there. And hopefully we'll have probably a bit of a busier screen. So see you all next Sunday for the Order Paper podcast. Good night. Whoop, wrong key.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/It's in the Ballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions, live at 8 p.m. New Zealand Standard Time every Sunday.